My guest for this episode of Duologues is proudly building a better working world at EY India. He is bullish about India's growth trajectory and truly believes that by nurturing our talent and entrepreneurial spirit, we can achieve greater heights. Please join me as I welcome Rajiv Memani to this episode of Duologues. Rajiv, thanks for joining this episode of Duologues, and it's a pleasure to be here at EY's office. Thank you for hosting us here. I'm sure this conversation is going to precipitate a lot of ideas and will be insightful, and I'm sure going to be inspiring for a lot of people. This one is going to be very unique because I think you are in a position where the conversation can reflect a lot about what's happening in our country, especially from economic perspective. And then I would like to dive into what's happening within EY as an organization, and I understand that you again are in a state which can be transformative, and then I would like to know more about you as individual. So again, thanks a lot for being here. To begin with, I think the first question which is coming to my mind is, especially in the backdrop of recently announced budget, and I have my own opinions on that because what I have seen in last 4 to 5 years is that the approach is becoming more structured. And for last 3 budgets, I noticed that the Honorable Finance Minister highlighted 4 pillars based on which the fundamental of the budget was structured. And this time we saw 9 focus areas, starting from agriculture to say skilling to consistently driving expansion of manufacturing in the country, and the overall impact cuts across the socio-economic fabric of the country. So I think to begin with, I would like to have your reflections on the recently announced budget.
Yeah, sure. So first, thanks a lot, Manish. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for coming over to our office, and it's a pleasure and privilege to be part of this conversation. So yeah, let's kick it off with the budget. I would say this government has been very focused in trying to ensure that we have a strong balance sheet as a country. So I think the first principal focus of the budget has been that the macroeconomic stability of the country should continue. And I think the budget has been very, very consistent in that, in the way they have looked at fiscal deficit, borrowings, everything else. The second thing is about resilience. So it's just not about having good growth, but when investors look at investing in any country or even Indian investors, they want to ensure that there is a consistency in policy, there is conservatism in approach. So I think this government has ensured through the budget process that they are consistent, they are conservative in their estimates. And if you actually look at last 3 years, they've invariably done better than what they have projected.
True.
The other trajectory that they have done is to, when you have 48, 49 lakh crores to spend, you try and see how do you want to spend the money. And they have shifted the spend from more revenue expenditure to more capital expenditure.
Right.
So basically putting a much stronger tenet on the economy. So almost 11.5 lakh crores of Capex that they have promised, which is record, it's almost 3.4% of our overall budget. So it's probably of the GDP. So overall, I think that's very, very strong because that propels the rest of the economy.
True.
And also then just having inclusive growth, ensuring that all the sectors are included. I think that's been really very, very strong. The one initiative that I would say, everything, when you look at a budget, there are always some things that strike, everyone looks at taxes and that kind of captures the immediate attention of everyone because its impacts has an immediacy of sort of impact.
Right.
But I would say the one thing that really caught my attention was around skilling. And what they did on skilling is to, basically the government said, we cannot skill on our own. So we really have to partner with industry to skill.
Yeah.
And they said we are willing to pay for that in a meaningful way. We also don't want to penalize the industry so they can use the CSR funds.
Right.
So skilling 1 crore people over a period of 5 years and giving that responsibility to the top 500 companies to do that, which means at an average, it'll be more or less, each company would be skilling 4,000 people every year and 20,000 people over a period of 5 years.
Right.
It's a big deal.
Absolutely.
It's probably the most aspirational, aggressive, ambitious that has been done anywhere in the world. and therefore execution of that will be very, very important.
Right.
If I would have one area where I think the government could have probably done more, I think the transmission of income to rural India. When I look at what's happening with middle class, trying to say if they could have done more relief, because we need to get a little bit more of the consumption lift.
Right.
A lot of the growth that's coming is because of the Capex spend and everything, which is absolutely right.
True.
In the medium term to long term. But in the shorter term, it's very important that we also get the consumption lift. So for a 7-8% GDP growth, if you're having a consumption growth of 4%,
True.
that has to move up.
Yeah.
So I would say if they could have done more there, that would have been great. But overall, I would say very, for the medium term to long term story of India, I think the current finance minister and the team have really done an outstanding job.
It's safe to believe that when investments into labor intensive manufacturing and any sector happens, you create more jobs. In that sense, you're putting more money in the hands of people, specifically the middle class. While there are challenges, as you rightly mentioned, that how do you catalyze the rural economy, because that still contributes larger part of what we are as a country. And when I look back last 10 years, one of the things which is very clear, at least in my mind, is that there is a lot which has happened on the supply side. And if I look at electronics industry in specific, it started off from MSIPs, say 10 years before, when they modified it. There came phased manufacturing programs, a structured way to restructure the tariffs which existed at that point of time and do away with the disabilities comparative to manufacturing the products elsewhere in the world. And finally came PLI. So I think a structured approach has happened in last 10 years when it comes to the supply side of it. Now, looking at demand side, what can be the triggers which can say put more money in the hand of people? We do understand that the entire tax structure plays a role when it comes to that. GST may not be a budget item. But when I look at my own industry, one question always comes to our mind is that why products like air conditioners, which used to be, say, luxury in the past, are a necessity, now should be taxed at 28%. Is there a hypothesis that you reduce it by a bit and look at growing that industry? We are still only 7.5% penetrated when it comes to categories like those. So what are your reflections on this?
No, I agree. I think, so they have taken a very fundamental long-term view of the economy, which means correct the supply side, give the supply side incentives. Those expenditure will flow into the hand, will create more jobs,
Right.
and will eventually start manifesting in the incomes of people.
Right.
I think that's been the approach. I think that's a medium term to long term. That's absolutely the right approach. I mean, if you about 10 years back, we were spending 90,000 crores on Capex.
Right.
And now we are spending more than 11 lakh crores.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's a 10x growth over the last 10 years, which is just phenomenal. But I think some amount of demand impetus has to be created because, jobs, when you have 1.5 crore youth looking for jobs every year, to service that is not, it's very difficult. So you have to create some cushions. And plus, we are also seeing an income inequality which is probably not right now you can argue to say that will happen when you have this kind of GDP growth, but structurally it doesn't augur well from a demand standpoint. Because, demand works when there is a more egalitarian growth in income. And I think if they could have done something probably more on the taxes, GST, obviously they have made reference of that in the budget. But if they can do that, that would have been good. Maybe some scheme, and I can't define the contours of the scheme.
Right.
Some scheme that gives more money in the hands of rural India, because there is pain there. I mean, if you look at the results of some of the larger companies that are catering to the needs of rural India, especially in the lower income categories, the demand volume growth is not that much, which doesn't sound right. So I think they could have done that. I think government's predicament in all this is once they do a scheme, then it cannot be a 1-year scheme, then it becomes sticky.
Absolutely.
So if you have to do, if suppose you want to say I want to take in 50,000-60,000 crores, because they had the balance sheet to do this.
Right.
If you look at the interim budget, they got an incremental 1.5 lakh crore of RBI dividend, there or thereabouts.
Right.
And what they did was to put 90,000 crores of that into fiscal deficit savings. So reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.9% from 5.1%, what they had mentioned before the elections.
Right.
and distributed a little bit on skilling and then transferred some to the states.
True.
So if you ask my personal view, if they could have devised a scheme where some of that income would have passed, maybe been slightly more generous to middle class India from a taxes standpoint, I think the overall momentum that it would have been created is
interesting.
Would have been good. But I would say on balance, I think their anticipation is that we are living in a very uncertain economic world.
Yeah.
And to deal with that, you have to have a strong balance sheet so that you can deal with the uncertainties. You have to lower inflation, you have to lower interest rates, and that's the way that you create demand. And that's why tighten up fiscal deficit, and that's the way you'll create demand.
Right. So they've been kind of cautiously optimistic.
Correct.
Right. And Rajiv, you also chair the Emerging Markets Committee, if the term is right, at EY. When you go to a distance and see our country, we all are extremely optimistic about the possibilities. And while we want to catalyze this whole process, we all know that once the average income crosses a particular threshold, which might be just about 3 to 5 years away in our country, the consumption quite exponentially starts to grow and we trigger a positive spiral. So I think it's a matter of just few more years for this India story to really position ourselves of what we truly deserve. But if you go to a distance and the position which you chair at EY, where there are many other geographies which are like emerging, and quite often into our industry hat when we see that there are some potential competitors. And working for a multinational company also, quite often the dilemma is that are we looking at India only as an opportunity? Of course, it is a big opportunity to look at India being a market, but then one of the intention is to build capabilities also. And while we were about to start off this conversation, you also mentioned that of the total workforce which EY has in India, 40% is for India and roughly 60% helps service the other subsidiaries of EY across the world. So when you wear that hat, how do you see India comparative to the other emerging economies in the world?
Yeah, I would say that every economy has its own sort of distinctive feature. But I would say the few things that distinguish India, the first I would say is the institutions of India are very strong.
Right.
And you start with democracy. I think no matter what people say globally, no matter what people say outside India, but the Indian democracy is really a shining example. Absolutely. And very robust democracy. I took a few days off and I traveled in rural India just pre-elections, and it was just amazing to see the way democracy plays out in the smallest villages and towns and rural India and these semi-urban India. The second is, if I look at our important institutions like RBI, like SEBI, I think they are very functionally run very well, very conservative, very long-term, very institutional in their approach. So I think that's one, the institutional aspect is very important. So I think the institutional structure, the political structure has been very strong. Right. And because of that, today if I look at our balance sheet as a country, it's very strong. For most of the emerging markets, some of them have very high inflation. Right. Some of them have very high debt. Today in India has never reneged on any global overseas commitment. You can remit as much. We are sitting on $650–700 billion of foreign exchange reserves. You look at the exports that we have. What India exports through IT services is more than what Saudi Arabia exports through oil. So it just and it's a much more robust way of sort of gaining foreign exchange. So I would say the fiscal deficit, the overall borrowings, the balance sheet of the country, the balance sheet of the financial institutions, the balance sheet of corporate India today is very, very strong. Right. Very few emerging markets will have such strong balance sheets, and conflicts between banks, corporates, companies, everything else, that's all been taken away. Right. In some of the emerging markets, some of the largest real estate companies own the banks. Right. So those kind of conflicts are not there in the system. And finally, I would say is the human talent that we have, human capital that we have is just a massive, massive competitive advantage. It's not just the numbers. I think we have a long way to go, that we have the quantity, that we translate that into quality, in the way we train, skill people and provide education to them. But still, in terms of whatever we have, the commitment of the people, the hard work, the aspiration that they have, and just the ability to do what it takes to be successful. And that's why the services industry in India is doing so well. I think that's a massive competitive advantage. So if you look at all that in totality, I think we are pretty unique. China is very strong. China is a different structure. I would say they are way ahead of India from where India is, but they operate in a different environment, different structure. I always have, we've all products of democracy. I think we are very happy to be
Right.
part of a democratic country. And I think that in its, that possesses, that long term, that's very valuable. But in the short term, you cannot grow. There are constraints. You have to take all constituents along, and I think that slows down growth. But in spite of that, I would say, if I was to compare across the world, this would be probably one of the brightest spots in the world. Whether you look at other emerging countries,
Right.
or you looked at developed and mature countries, I think it's truly, I think where we are today
Fantastic.
is a real sweet spot.
Right. So, a couple of things coming to my mind. You, for a different reason, touched that there are geographies, countries with abundance of mines and minerals. I'll come to that a little later. Uh, what are your thoughts on the concept of Viksit Bharat? And when I try to understand that, of course, it means a developed nation. Everybody understands, and from an economic point of view, we can always define what it takes to be a developed nation. And founder of Panasonic, Konosuke Matsushita, was a legend in oneself, and I continue to get inspired by his philosophies. And one of the initiatives which he started way back, many decades before in Japan, I think in the backdrop of the World War which got concluded, was an initiative called PHP. He founded an institute called PHP, which is Peace and Harmony Through Prosperity. So one of the ways to look at Viksit Bharat is that if we are able to say democratize prosperity, and you spoke about income equality and those kind of things. So I think it is not only the average per capita, but how we are dividing the wealth equally as much as possible within the nation. Then there is another concept which is Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India. In one of my conversations, similar conversations, somebody mentioned that Atmanirbhar Bharat is not about having everything to be done by ourselves, but letting things happen in the way we want them to happen, at our own terms. It is not about detaching ourselves from the world. It is about engaging with the world at our own terms. What are your reflections on these two concepts, Viksit Bharat and Atmanirbhar Bharat?
I think Manish, the way you've laid out, it's pretty similar to that. In 1947, when the country gained independence,
Right.
We were amongst the poorest countries. Everyone who could plunder us plundered us. And economically, we are very fragile. Politically, we are very fragile. We just went through a partition, which was probably one of the most horrific cases in history. And if you roll that out 100 years later, I do believe that as a country we have a lot to be proud of. But one area which I think is that the per capita income, for me, that is an important measure.
Sure.
So I think we did a report of India at 100. And at least our conservative estimate was that the per capita income should be, the size of the economy at that time should be closer to, somewhere between 25 trillion to 30 trillion. And then you would have per capita income of anywhere between $15,000 to $18,000. So in the next 24 years, if you can have 1.5, 1.6 billion people transitioning to almost 6 times the per capita income that we have today, if we can achieve that in a sustainable, inclusive manner, that is Viksit Bharat. So you can have a very large economy, but if you have massive inequality, so if that incremental $12,500 that is to come, if that gets concentrated with 3%, 4% part of the population, then that's not sustainable. So how that, how the trickle down happens, and how we do that in an inclusive way, how do we do that in a sustainable way, that to me is the ultimate yardstick of Viksit Bharat. So that's the way I would look at Viksit Bharat. On Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think what was happening was, for a lot of important things, especially relating to manufacturing and others, we were importing our way through. So I think in some ways, and you know, if you look at the development post World War II,
Right.
if you have to look at the development of most economies in the world, so you would say the three most striking growth stories, or four most striking growth stories that have happened in the last 50, 60 years, you would say Germany, Japan, South Korea, China. And you have had the fortune of working with some of the organizations. So you, in at least three of the four countries,
Of
you
course.
probably know pretty intimately.
Right.
So, and you see what they have done. I think there was a lot of pride. If you look at also supply chain, a lot of the supply chain dependencies were there.
Right.
It is, if you go to South Korea, it's hard to see cars that are not South Korean. If you go to Japan, they're hard to see products and cars that are not Japanese.
Absolutely.
If you look at the way China became the factory of the world, but gradually you can see, if you look at BYD, you look
Their
at the
own
other
brands.
cars, you know,
Yeah.
it's changing and changing for the right reasons. So we are living in a global world. We have to have a global mindset.
Right.
But at the same time, if we have the largest population in the world, we cannot import our way through.
Right.
So for me, Atmanirbharta is a very, how we achieve that is very, very important. It doesn't mean that you close eyes to the world, because India has benefited immensely from globalization.
Right.
Whether it's in terms of the technology industry, whether it's in terms of foreign direct investment, whether it is in terms of education, skilling. So we have to be an open world, open economy and everything else. But we, at the same time, we should ensure that we are fully doing full justice to our competitive advantage.
Right.
Manufacturing, being the factory of the world, and at the per capita income that we are in, if you're not doing that, in many parts of the world today, the average per capita income is $100,000, $110,000, $120,000.
Right.
Our per capita income is $2,500, $3,000. We should be doing much more from a manufacturing standpoint,
Right.
from a productivity standpoint, so that we can lift the per capita income.
Right.
And that is very, very important. So for me, it's very similar to what you mentioned about Atmanirbharta, but I was just trying to explain that from a more sort of quantitative standpoint.
Yeah, moving on. So let's talk things which EY does. And leading this organization in the country, I think, is a large responsibility to deal with, and of course, an opportunity also. What I understood was that of the 400,000 strong strength of EY globally, we have about 100,000 people in India, and of that, 40,000 people work for the country. Give us a sense of the purpose of existence of EY, and I would like to also know the current chair, Janet, I think, gave all in as a mission statement or the purpose of existence. So give us a sense of what is that all about, and how are you driving that cultural change within the organization? It's a large organization globally.
So I would say, firstly, I think leading EY in India is not a big deal. I think it's a privilege. Let me first put it. I think it's a privilege, and I'm thankful to, all our teams and the Almighty for giving me this privilege of leading this. It's just a fantastic opportunity. And you're right, we have a massive talent pool, and probably some of the best talent in India works with EY.
Yeah.
And we're very fortunate for that. Our sort of purpose, raison d'etre, if you actually see, is really building a better working world.
Okay.
So that's what drives us. It's something that our chairman, earlier chairman, who was in 2013, when purpose was not a fashionable word, it became much more fashionable in 16, 17. He decided that an organization needs to have a very strong purpose, and he defined, building a better working world. And that resonated so well with everyone, because in a global firm like ours, which is present in more than 120, 130 countries, it's important that everyone connects with a purpose. The way we can contribute to all the stakeholders so that they rely on the financial statements, the entire financial ecosystem actually works very well. When we are doing taxes, just to ensure that compliances are there, that we are helping both the private sector to ensure that they are complying, and the government also to give them comfort that the compliance is doing well. If you are working in India, for example, if we are working with entrepreneurial companies, helping them to raise private equity, raise capital to fuel their growth, or helping them to be more efficient, more optimal, more competitive, so that they can hire more people, grow faster.
Right.
So it's a wider way of looking at building a better working world. But everything that we do, that most of it has to resonate with that.
Right.
And the other thing I would say is, even when we are working with government, so some of the most, whether it was the Aadhaar thing that was built, we worked very closely in building the entire Aadhaar platform, or platforms around Skill India, on Ayushman Bharat, or on the Diksha portal on education. So we have been very involved in building some of these platforms, working in partnership with various people to do that. So I think that's the purpose, and that's the purpose of our existence.
Wonderful.
And from a firm standpoint, we had Mark Weinberger who did that, then we had Carmine, and now we have had the fortune of having Janet. She took some time to see what our strategy should be, and I think she's defining the strategy. And the strategy, the what she's terming that strategy is all in. And all in is an attitude. It's not. It's about teaming. It's really it's about teaming, about collaboration, how teams work with each other, giving everything that they have. Is how we work with our clients. As one team, collaborative, giving it for a common purpose, common mission, and everything else. That's the mindset. And again, the way it was done was, hundreds of names were thrown around. Engagement happened with lots of people across different parts of the world, and finally everyone was comfortable.
Wonderful.
With that. From a change standpoint, I would say change has been a constant. So I don't think that we have to have massive change in India to do that. I think from a culture standpoint, our culture has always been very entrepreneurial.
Right.
I think that's one of the reasons I would think why we've been reasonably successful as a firm. The second thing is constant learning. And I think that's getting reinforced through all in. So we would want to ensure, it's how do we fuel the development of our people. I think that's very, very important for us.
Right.
So today we would do, we have in the sort of one part of the business, we have 43,000 people. So we would want to ensure that we have 80 to 90 learning hours per person. So you're looking at almost 3.5 million to 4 million hours.
Interesting.
At an average, at an aggregate level. And in areas which are obviously, if you're a tax professional, you're a consulting professional, you're an audit professional, you're a transactions person in your domain, in the sectors, but a lot of it is also in areas like AI. So we have had a massive program, for example, where we have had 25,000 people grow through a very extensive AI program, where the theory of AI, some practical experiences, demonstrations, getting people actually to use both AI, Gen AI, everything else, getting experts from around the country, getting experts from around the world to say what are the latest trends, how that's happening in a continuous manner. And we call that the AI versity.
Right.
And that's something that we are doing. So I think that's the, I would say, if I have to look at it, we always had an entrepreneurial culture, but how do we instill more and more learning, and how we instill more and more development, that's very important. And teaming and collaboration, which is always a constant journey. How do you improve teaming? How do you improve collaboration? I would say those will be the three things.
Right.
From how we look at our organization and what are the changes. Then you have strategic things to say, okay, how do you embrace technology more? What are the things that you have to do on sectors, on accounts, and everything else? But that's
Wow, that's a lot. There's so much to talk, but I'm cognizant of time. So, moving on to you as individual, like you've invested more than 35, 36 years with the firm.
Right.
I mean, today, if you look at the environment, one of the things which a lot of us are grappling with, and I believe that times are changing, and therefore the preferences of people are changing, and controlling attrition happens to be one of the challenge continually. So, I mean, how has this happened? This would make you and few other people unique in some sense, having like staying with one organization for that long.
See, in a partnership firm, it's not that uncommon.
Okay.
So if you look at our firm, there would be
Yeah, right.
quite a few lifers who are
Agreed.
there. Maybe because we just couldn't do anything better in life. So that I think probably is the biggest reason. And but as I said earlier, listen, I mean, I think, you know, the day I joined, I felt I belonged to this place. Every day has been enriching, challenging. You feel, you know, you enjoy coming to work. You feel that you're learning something. I think that's very important. You feel that you're challenged, and you enjoy working with your teams. So I think that's been the experience. And, you know, personally speaking for myself, as I said, I've been just incredibly fortunate to be leading this organization. Um when I joined the firm in 1988, our office was probably the twice the size of this room. So I have, and when I went to Singapore to be there for some time, I always used to think that I wish, you know, someday we'll have something like, you know, an
Like that.
office size like that. So I think, you know, we've been, as Warren Buffett put it, you know, you Americans had the ovarian lottery. Yeah, you know, I think some ways that the India that we have seen from where we were, from being an absolute closed economy when we grew up, to now being, you know, resilient, confident, aspirational. I think that's something that we've been very fortunate to be part of that journey. So I've never honestly, I've thought like an entrepreneur. I've felt that, you know, if I'm doing this, we're doing this as you know, for ourselves and for a broader cause, for the country. And I think most of the people, you know, who have been in the organization, one of the things that we have that has distinguished us as an organization is that the stability in our organization, the stability in our leadership teams, without becoming a club, you know, very competitive,
Wonderful.
very accountable, very responsible, very entrepreneurial. I think that's that in some ways, I would say that as an organization, that's been a strength. Now, you can always say there are pros and cons of doing that, but on balance, I think in a market like India, in a country like India, that's worked very well for us.
Yeah. You mentioned change is the only constant. You know, I quite often say that the rate of change itself is changing.
Yeah.
How do you keep yourselves updated, like relevant with the changing times? What do you do?
So I would say you being paranoid and being insecure is a very important trait of any leader.
Right.
So that drives
Right.
the learning. When you see something changing, when you always try and see, okay, what's the opportunity there? And that's the way I've looked at it. That's the way the organization has looked at it. You know, as an organization, one of our strengths has been that whenever something happens, we try and spot the opportunity. We double down on that. We invest. We put some of our biggest talent there, and we galvanize the organization.
Wonderful.
That's what we do. But technology, I would say, to me, is the most fundamental and the biggest change that's happening. So one is enabling our clients and helping our clients through our technology consulting practice. But more importantly, we believe that as an organization, we have to infuse technology in everything that we are doing.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, whether it's audit work that we do, whether it's tax work that we do, whether it's consulting work that we do, whether it's our financial processes, and the amazing thing about India is that the younger people are so, when you give them the opportunity, they're just so brilliant in innovating at scale, at a cost that is unbelievably low. And the whole thing is, how do you get the organization to adopt to that, is the management challenge of that. So that's what we are doing to ensure that we are constantly change, because in every change we see an opportunity.
Right.
And we know that if we don't capture that opportunity, someone else will. We are not entitled in any way for that, to capture that. So we have to, as an organization, be competitive, fleet-footed, as I said, insecure,
Right.
and at the edge to be trying to do that.
Rajiv, you're like radiating this sense of calm, you know, sitting into the position you are into. It's not easy to manage such complexity, as you rightly mentioned, that things are changing fast, and adoption of technology and embracing that change in a manner one should is not easy. You're managing this complexity reasonably simply. So how do you manage yourselves? Like, where does this sense of calm come from?
I'm repeating myself. I honestly, maybe I'm looking at your calm demeanor, and that's reflecting on me. But simplicity is the hardest thing to achieve.
Right. Yeah.
So I think whether it's in everything that you do, in the way you conduct with your people, the way they can read you, the way you engage and interact with them. So we are very, by instinct, we are very complex people. And as you become leaders and as you have more experience, you become more and more complex as an
Yeah.
individual. So how do you make things more and more simple in your head?
Right.
And which is basically not getting anything to go to your head.
Right.
So I'm saying that in a
Appreciate it.
you can do that, you can interpret that
Yeah,
in some
right.
funny ways as well.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
I understand.
but I think that's very important. And secondly, I honestly truly believe that sometimes at management roles, when we are CEOs or leading this thing, honestly, I would say that the office boy in my office probably has a tougher existence than I have. So I just feel that and as I said, I'm just grateful to everyone around and whosoever is upstairs. But the fortune that you get of leading this kind of organization, how fortunate you are.
True.
If one sees that, I think that's very important. Personally, I mean, I'm not I don't have esoteric tastes. I mean, I enjoy my runs in the morning. uh, I'm very inspired by spiritual parts of India. So I don't do enough reading, but whatever I do, I try and do that. I try and do some pranayam and everything else
Wonderful.
every day in the morning, but nothing. But when I see people who are meditating, people, the amount of reading that they do, the knowledge that they have, I'm nowhere close to any one of them. But I just, as I said, I just want to keep my
Wonderful.
personal objective in life is, and as you evolve and as you age, you figure out that personal
Yeah.
objective is really to try and uh, keep things simple.
Appreciate it. This brings me to my last question. What is that very higher purpose which say wakes you up every morning to do what you do?
I honestly, I don't have any higher purpose. At an individual level, I just want to feel that I'm learning, I'm personally relevant, I'm mentally active, I'm physically active.
Wonderful.
So I mean, I just want to keep things simple. I want to ensure that I believe that we are individuals, we are very fortunate, especially when you look around in our country. So whatever we can do to contribute to the society at a personal level, at an organizational level, Manish, we, for the last 15 years, much before sustainability, this CSR contribution, and that doesn't apply to us because we are a partnership, but much before all this came, we contribute 0.5% of our revenues religiously
Interesting.
towards EY Foundation, and we do
Wonderful.
some phenomenal work there. Whether it's in terms of providing scholarships to the underprivileged, almost 1,000 a year, whether it's working in villages, we are working in almost 2,000 villages, mainly with women,
Right.
impacting lives of almost 500,000 women, and now trying to do more on sustainability, whether it's on water, whether it's on pollution, other areas. We have not done enough, but there's a lot to do there. So that's the second part. And from a country standpoint, I think at least if we can create, for me, the biggest challenge for the country is to create more jobs.
Right.
So if we can create more jobs in India, that's something that always inspires me. At the end of the day, if we can create more jobs, if we can provide, more opportunities to our younger people, that kind of inspires me. And from a global standpoint, if, we are all bought into the firm, we are part of EY, we want to see global growth. And the firm being stronger globally. But if India can be a more meaningful part of that growth, if India can be more relevant to that growth, if India can intellectually contribute to that growth,
Right.
that's something that, at a macro level, those are the things that you look
Wonderful. Yeah, Rajiv, thank you so much. This was very engaging for me and very insightful. I wish you all the best for all the initiatives at EY, and congratulations for being president designate at CII. I'm sure the efforts will get amplified and larger benefit of industry and hence for the country will happen when you take over that responsibility in the time to come.
Yeah.
And it was a pleasure having this conversation, as I said, with you.
at. Thank you so much, Manish. It was a real pleasure interacting, engaging. Your questions were very insightful. So really enjoyed. Time flew by, so really enjoyed.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank
Thanks.
you.